I found out Catherine never actually loved me 3 years into our marriage when I overheard her on the phone with her friend Molly. She was in the garage, thought I was still at work. The exact words were that marrying me was the smart choice because I had stability and a solid income. But she wished I had more of a spine, that I embarrassed her sometimes, that she'd made a practical decision, not a romantic one. I didn't confront her. I just filed it away and started paying attention. We'd been together 7 years total, married for 5. I'm 35, she's 33. We met through mutual friends at a work thing, dated for 2 years before getting engaged. Catherine works in marketing, makes decent money, but I'm a software engineer and I make significantly more. Her family loved that about me right away. Her mother Leah made comments about how Catherine was finally dating someone responsible, someone who could provide properly. Her father Gerald would clap me on the shoulder and talk about financial planning and retirement accounts. The medication thing started 4 years ago. I'd always had some anxiety, but after a project at work went sideways and I spent 6 months fixing someone else's massive screw-up while working 80-hour weeks, I started having panic attacks. Not the kind where you feel nervous. The kind where your chest seizes up and you genuinely think you're dying. My doctor prescribed medication and it helped, but Catherine's attitude toward me shifted almost immediately. She started making little comments. How I needed to just calm down. How other guys didn't need pills to function. How her father worked construction for 30 years and never complained about stress. I'd notice her watching me take my medication in the morning with this expression, like she was disappointed. Her family picked up on it too. Leah would make remarks about how men these days weren't built like they used to be. Gerald stopped asking me about work and started talking over me at family dinners. Catherine's brother Connor, who's honestly a decent guy, was the only one who didn't treat me differently, but he lives in Colorado and we barely see him. The worst part was how Catherine started using my anxiety against me during arguments. If I got upset about something, she'd tell me I was having an episode, that I needed to go take my pills and calm down, that I was being irrational and emotional, like those were the worst things a man could be. I realized somewhere around year 4 that I'd married someone who fundamentally didn't respect me. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you about that kind of realization. You don't just leave. You start watching. You start planning. You make sure all the finances are organized exactly how you want them. You document patterns of behavior. You talk to a lawyer just to understand what divorce would look like. You get everything in order. And then you wait for them to give you the perfect reason. Thanksgiving was at Leah and Gerald's house this year. Same as always. Catherine had been stressed about work for weeks and taking it out on me in small ways. Comments about how I hadn't fixed the garage door yet, how I'd forgotten to pick up her dry cleaning, how I never wanted to go out with her friends anymore. Standard stuff that I'd learned to just absorb. The dinner itself was fine at first. Gerald carved the turkey. Leah brought out side dishes that looked like they came from a magazine spread. Catherine's aunt and uncle were there. Some cousins I'd met maybe twice. Everyone was drinking, getting louder as the evening went on. I'd taken my evening medication before dinner because I knew being around her family for hours would be stressful. I just swallowed the pill with some water in their kitchen. Didn't think anything of it. Catherine saw me. She'd been drinking wine steadily since we arrived, and she got this look on her face. This smile that wasn't really a smile. She walked over and grabbed the pill bottle from where I'd left it on the counter, just picked it up and held it. I asked her what she was doing, kept my voice level. She walked into the dining room where everyone was sitting down and held up the bottle, shook it. The pills rattled inside and everyone looked over. She announced that everyone should know I take medication for my nerves, that I'm on crazy pills. Her exact words. She shook the bottle again like it was a Maraca, making a show of it, and several people laughed. Her aunt made a comment about how modern medicine has a pill for everything now. Leah said something about how men used to just deal with their problems instead of running to doctors. I stood in the doorway and watched this happen. Catherine was still holding my medication bottle, shaking it periodically for effect, and people were laughing each time. Gerald said I should try working with my hands more, that physical labor builds character and mental toughness, that his generation didn't need pills because they had real problems to deal with. Catherine added that sometimes she hides the bottle just to see what happens, that I panic like a child looking for a lost toy. She mimicked me, searching through cabinets, making her voice high and anxious. More laughter. I didn't say anything. I stood there and watched my wife mock my medical condition in front of her entire family while they encouraged her. Leah looked directly at me and said I should be grateful Catherine puts up with this, that her daughter deserves a real man, not someone who falls apart over stress, that she'd been telling Catherine for years that she could do better. Catherine sat back down at the table, still holding my medication bottle. She put it in her purse. I walked over, held out my hand, asked for it back. She said no, Said I could get it later if I behaved myself during dinner. Several people laughed again. I told her this wasn't funny, that I needed that medication. She rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic, that missing one dose wouldn't kill me, that I needed to learn to function without chemical help. I left the room, went to their guest bathroom and locked the door, pulled out my phone and called a lawyer I'd consulted with 6 months earlier, asked if he was available for an emergency meeting the day after Thanksgiving. He said yes. Then I called my brother-in-law Connor in Colorado, told him what just happened. He went quiet for a long moment, and then said he'd been worried about how Catherine treated me, that he'd noticed things over the years but didn't feel like it was his place to intervene. He asked what I was going to do. I told him I was done, that I'd tried for years to make this work, but I couldn't stay married to someone who humiliated me for entertainment. He said he understood, that he was sorry, that Catherine had always been their parents' favorite and they'd enabled a lot of bad behavior growing up. I ended the call and sat there for a few minutes. Then I went back out to the dining room. Everyone was eating, talking, laughing. Normal Thanksgiving dinner. I walked up to Catherine and told her I was leaving, that I'd taken an Uber here so she could drive home whenever she wanted. She looked up at me with this confused expression, asked what I was talking about. I said I was leaving the dinner and the marriage. The room went silent. Catherine laughed and said I was being ridiculous, that I was having an episode, that I needed to sit down and eat. I told her I'd never been more clear-headed in my life, that I wanted a divorce. Leah stood up and said I was being dramatic and disrespectful, that I was ruining Thanksgiving over nothing, that Catherine was just joking around. I looked at Catherine and told her she could keep the medication bottle, that I had refills and I wouldn't need to see her to get it back, that my lawyer would be in touch. Then I walked out, called an Uber from their driveway, and waited outside in the cold November air. Catherine came running out about 2 minutes later, started yelling about how I couldn't just leave like this, that we needed to talk about this, that I was overreacting. I didn't respond. The Uber pulled up and I got in. She stood in the driveway watching the car drive away. I went home, packed a bag, and checked into a hotel, changed my phone lock screen password, started organizing documents. The text started around midnight. Catherine sent maybe 30 messages asking where I was, saying we needed to talk, saying I was being insane, saying her family was upset with me, saying this was all my fault for embarrassing her. Then the tone changed around 2 a.m. She started apologizing, said she'd had too much to drink, that she didn't mean any of it, that her family was just joking around, that I knew how they were, that she'd give the medication back, that we could talk about this. I didn't respond to any of it. Friday morning, I met with the lawyer, explained the situation. He asked about assets, property, debts. We own a house together. It's in both names, but I put down the entire down payment, and I've been paying about 70% of the mortgage because I make more. We have a joint checking account and separate savings accounts. No kids. He said this should be relatively straightforward and asked if I wanted to proceed immediately. I said yes. By Friday afternoon, Catherine had called 47 times. The voicemails started off angry and gradually became more desperate. She showed up at the house Friday evening, but I wasn't there. She called my parents asking where I was. My mom called me concerned, said Catherine sounded very upset, and I explained what happened. Mom went quiet and then said she'd always worried about how Catherine's family treated me, that she was proud of me for standing up for myself. Saturday morning, the lawyer filed paperwork. Catherine would be served early next week. Saturday afternoon, I went back to the house with a friend from work to get more of my things. Catherine's car wasn't there. I packed clothes, important documents, some personal items. I also checked our joint account. Catherine had withdrawn $3,000 Friday night. I transferred the remaining balance to my personal account and closed the joint account. Left her a text saying I noticed the withdrawal and that she should probably get her own lawyer soon. She called immediately, started screaming about how I couldn't just take all the money. I pointed out that she took $3,000 first. She said that was different, that she needed it because she didn't know what I was planning. I hung up. Sunday, she started texting about how we'd built a life together, how she loved me, how one bad night didn't erase 5 years of marriage, how her mother felt terrible about everything, how everyone wanted to apologize. I finally responded, said that one bad night didn't erase anything, that it had revealed everything, that this was years of contempt coming to a head, and I was done. She asked where I was staying, said we needed to talk face to face. I said no, that anything else would go through lawyers. Monday morning, I got a call from Leah. She said I was being dramatic and immature, that Catherine made a mistake, but I was blowing everything out of proportion. That marriage requires forgiveness and working through problems. That I was throwing away a good woman over one incident. I told Leah that her daughter publicly mocked my medical condition, stole my medication, and humiliated me in front of her entire family while everyone laughed. That this wasn't one incident, it was years of disrespect finally showing its true face. Leah said I was too sensitive. That men need to be able to take a joke. That her generation didn't fall apart over hurt feelings. I ended the call. Catherine was served with divorce papers Monday afternoon. My phone started ringing 30 seconds later and didn't stop for hours. Update 1. So that phone call I mentioned at the end of my last post? Catherine called 63 times Monday evening after being served. I'm not exaggerating. 63 calls in 4 hours. I finally picked up around 9 p.m. because my phone was unusable. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She told me I was making a huge mistake and that I clearly wasn't thinking straight. That the medication must be affecting my judgment, and I should probably talk to my doctor about adjusting my dosage. That divorce was nuclear, and we needed to work through this like adults. I said we were done working through anything, that I'd tried for years and I was finished. She shifted tactics immediately, started talking about the house, how we'd picked it out together, how she'd decorated it, how we'd planned to raise a family there eventually. I asked her when exactly we'd discussed raising a family since she'd been on birth control our entire marriage and never once mentioned wanting kids. She went quiet for a moment and then said that wasn't the point. The point was, we had a life together and I was throwing it away. I told her the life we had was built on her contempt for me and her family's enablement of it. That I'd overheard her 3 years ago telling Molly she married me for stability, not love. She sucked in a breath, asked what I was talking about. I repeated what I'd heard, word for word. I'd memorized it. How she'd told Molly that marrying me was the smart choice because I had a good income and wouldn't push back on things. How she wished I had more of a backbone. How it was a practical decision. She tried to claim I'd misunderstood, that I'd taken something out of context, that she loved me, and I knew that. I asked her to explain the context where telling your friend you married someone for their money and stability rather than love could possibly be okay. She couldn't. She started crying then. Said she'd been venting to a friend and everyone says things they don't mean. That I'd never mentioned hearing that conversation, so she assumed I hadn't been bothered by it. I told her I'd been bothered by it every single day for 3 years. That I'd watched her after that. Watched how she treated me. Watched how her family treated me. Watched how she used my anxiety against me. That Thanksgiving was just the final proof of what I already knew. She said I was being paranoid. That I was seeing things that weren't there. That the medication was making me unstable. I hung up. She texted immediately saying we needed to talk about the house. That she wasn't going anywhere, that it was her home too. I called my lawyer Tuesday morning, asked about the house situation. He said either we both stay and make it work until the divorce is final, one of us moves out voluntarily, or we force a sale. He recommended I move back in since I'd been paying the majority of the mortgage and leaving could be seen as abandoning the property. So Tuesday afternoon I went back to the house. Catherine's car was in the driveway. I let myself in and she was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and papers everywhere. She looked up and said we needed to talk. I told her I was moving back in per my lawyer's advice, that I'd take the guest room, that we didn't need to interact. She stood up and said this was ridiculous, that we lived in the same house and we couldn't just ignore each other, that we needed to have an actual conversation about what happened. I started walking toward the stairs with my bag. She followed me, kept talking, said her mother was right that I was being too sensitive, that what happened at Thanksgiving was embarrassing for her too, because I'd made a scene. That her whole family was upset with both of us now. I stopped on the stairs and turned around, asked her how exactly I'd made a scene. She said by walking out in the middle of dinner, by announcing I wanted a divorce in front of everyone, by embarrassing her in her parents' home. I asked what I should have done instead. Sat there while she mocked my medical condition, laughed along while her mother called me a broken toy. She said those were jokes, that her family has a dark sense of humor and I'd always been too uptight about it, that I knew how they were. I said yes, I knew exactly how they were. That's why I was divorcing her. She threw her hands up and said I was impossible to talk to, that I wasn't even trying to understand her perspective. I went upstairs and locked myself in the guest room. Heard her pacing in the hallway for a while before she went back downstairs. Wednesday morning I worked from home. Catherine left for her office around 8. I used the time to go through our home office more carefully. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just wanted to understand our finances better before the divorce proceedings got serious. I found a credit card statement I didn't recognize in her desk drawer. It was in her name only, which was fine. But the balance was almost $12,000. The charges were all from the last 8 months. High-end restaurants I'd never been to with her. A spa retreat weekend to somewhere upstate. Hundreds of dollars at boutiques and salons. I took photos of the statements. Texted them to my lawyer asking if this was relevant. He called me back within 20 minutes. Asked if I'd known about this card? I said no. He said it proved she'd been maintaining a separate financial life and the charges showed a pattern of personal spending that I wasn't part of. He asked if I'd noticed her going on trips or having unexplained absences. I thought about it. There had been a weekend in September where she said she was going to visit Molly upstate. A few long lunches during the week that she'd mentioned were work meetings. Some nights where she came home late and said she'd been having dinner with colleagues. My lawyer said to keep the photos and not mention them to Catherine yet, that we'd use them during discovery. Catherine came home Wednesday evening and immediately started in on me about the house. Said we needed to decide what to do about it, that she wanted to keep it, that I should be the one to move out since I'd been the one to file for divorce. I said I'd been paying 70% of the mortgage and I'd put down the entire down payment, that if anyone had more claim to the house, it was me. She said marriage didn't work like that we'd bought it together and it was jointly owned, that she'd contributed too. I asked her how. She'd paid 30% of the mortgage, sure, but I'd covered the down payment, most of the renovation costs, all the major repairs. She'd picked paint colors and bought decorations. She said I was being spiteful, that I was trying to take everything from her just because I was angry. I said I wasn't trying to take anything. I was trying to divorce her, that the house would probably be sold and we'd split the proceeds based on what each of us had contributed. She started crying again, said the house was her home, that she'd built a life here, that I couldn't just take that away from her. I reminded her that she'd taken my medication bottle and mocked me in front of her family, that she'd stolen $3,000 from our joint account, that she'd apparently been running up a $12,000 credit card bill on things I wasn't even aware of. Her face went pale. She asked how I knew about the card. I said I'd found the statements, that I'd been looking through our financial documents. She said I had no right to go through her personal things, that the card was hers and none of my business. I pointed out that we were married and in the middle of a divorce, that everything was about to become both of our business. She said the card was for personal expenses, for things she needed, that I'd never understood that she had needs beyond what I provided. I asked what that meant. She said I was boring, that I never wanted to go out, that I was always anxious about money and planning for retirement, that she was 33 years old and wanted to actually live her life instead of just existing in our quiet house with our quiet routines. I said then she should have married someone else, someone who wanted the same things she did. She said she'd married who she needed to marry, that she'd made a choice, that I'd been stable and responsible, and that's what had mattered at the time. There it was. Exactly what I'd heard her tell Molly 3 years ago, but this time said directly to me. I asked what had changed. She said nothing had changed, that she still needed stability, that she still needed me to be the responsible one, but that didn't mean she had to give up everything else, that she deserved to have fun, to go out, to enjoy her life, that just because I was content living like we were 50 years old didn't mean she had to be. I asked if that's what she'd been doing with the credit card, having fun. She said yes, that she'd been going out with Molly and other friends, taking weekends away, actually enjoying herself instead of just working and coming home to a husband who needed pills to function. I asked why she'd married me if she found me so inadequate. She said I wasn't inadequate. I was exactly what she needed. A stable income, a nice house, someone who wouldn't cause problems or cheat or leave, someone reliable. But that didn't mean she was going to spend her 30s sitting at home watching me worry about everything. I told her that was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me, that at least now I knew exactly where I stood, that I'd been a financial plan, not a husband. She said that wasn't fair, that lots of marriages were practical, that love could grow over time even if it wasn't there at the start. I asked if it had grown for her. She didn't answer. Thursday morning, Leah and Gerald showed up at my office. My office. They somehow found out where I worked, showed up at reception, and demanded to see me. My boss came to my desk looking confused, said there were people in the lobby claiming to be my in-laws and wanting to speak with me, that they were causing a scene. I went down to reception. Leah and Gerald were standing there, and Leah was telling the receptionist that they needed to speak with me immediately, that it was a family emergency. I asked them what they were doing here. Leah said they needed to talk some sense into me, that I was ruining Catherine's life, that this divorce was ridiculous and needed to stop. I said this wasn't the place for this conversation. Gerald said they'd tried calling me and I wasn't answering, that I'd left them no choice but to track me down. I asked how they'd found my office. Leah said they'd looked up my employer online and driven over, that this was important. My boss was watching from across the lobby. Other people were staring. I told Leah and Gerald that they needed to leave, that this was my workplace. Gerald said Catherine was their daughter, and they weren't going to stand by while I destroyed her over nothing, that I'd humiliated her, that I'd turned her family's Thanksgiving into a disaster. I said I'd left their Thanksgiving after being publicly mocked, that the disaster was of their own making. Leah said I was being a child, that marriages required work and forgiveness, that Catherine had made a mistake, But she loved me, and I was throwing away everything good we had. I asked Leah if she remembered calling me a broken toy. If she remembered saying Catherine deserved a real man. She said she'd been drinking, that she'd said things she didn't mean, that I was blowing everything out of proportion. I told them both to leave my office. Gerald said they weren't going anywhere until I agreed to call off the divorce. My boss walked over and asked if everything was okay. I told him these were my soon-to-be ex-in-laws and they were just leaving. Leah turned to my boss and said I was making a terrible mistake, that I was clearly not thinking straight and maybe someone needed to talk to me about my judgment. My boss looked at me with raised eyebrows. I asked Leah to please leave. She said she was trying to help, that someone needed to intervene before I ruined my life. Security walked over, asked if there was a problem. Gerald said there was no problem, that we were just having a family discussion. I told security that these people needed to leave, that they weren't welcome here. Security asked Leah and Gerald to leave the building. Leah told me this wasn't over, that Catherine needed me, and I was being selfish and cruel. Security escorted them out. My boss pulled me aside after they left, asked if I was okay. I said I was going through a divorce and my in-laws weren't handling it well. He said if they showed up again to call security immediately, that he didn't want workplace drama. I apologized. He waved it off, but I could tell he was concerned. I texted my lawyer immediately, told him what happened. He said to document everything, to write down exactly what they said. That harassment was relevant to the divorce proceedings. Catherine called me an hour later, said her parents had told her what happened, that I'd had them thrown out of my office, that I'd embarrassed them. I said they'd embarrassed themselves by showing up at my workplace uninvited, that they'd caused a scene. She said they were trying to help, that they loved both of us and wanted us to work things out, that I was being unreasonable by refusing to even listen. I said I'd listened at Thanksgiving, that I'd heard exactly what her family thought of me, that I'd heard what she thought of me, that I was done listening. She said I was twisting everything, that I was making this all about me when it wasn't, that her family was hurting too, that everyone was upset. I said good, that they should be upset, that maybe now they'd understand that treating people with contempt had consequences. She asked what I wanted from her. What would make me stop this? I said nothing would make me stop, that the divorce was happening whether she accepted it or not. She said we needed to at least agree on the house, that we couldn't both keep living there, that it was too stressful. I said she was welcome to move out any time, that I wasn't going anywhere. She said she couldn't afford to move out, that she didn't have anywhere to go. I said she had parents 20 minutes away. She could stay with them. She said she wasn't moving back in with her parents at 33 years old, that was humiliating. I said then she'd better figure something else out because I wasn't leaving. She hung up on me. Friday morning, I got a text from Molly, Catherine's best friend. She said she'd heard about the divorce and wanted to talk, that Catherine had told her what happened and she thought I should know some things. I didn't respond. She texted again, said Catherine had been venting to her for years about our marriage, that she'd told Molly things I should probably know, that it might change my perspective. I was curious despite myself. I called her. Molly answered immediately. She said she'd been Catherine's friend since college and she'd watched our whole relationship, that she wanted to be honest with me, that Catherine had told her years ago that she'd married me for security, that Catherine had been dating someone else when we met, someone she'd actually been in love with, but he was broke and directionless, that her parents had pushed her to end it and find someone more suitable. I asked why she was telling me this now. Molly said because Catherine was spinning the story to everyone, making it sound like I'd suddenly snapped over nothing, that she was worried Catherine was going to manipulate everyone into thinking I was the problem. I asked what she wanted from this conversation. Molly said nothing, that she just thought I deserved to know the truth, that Catherine had been using me from the beginning, and she was tired of watching it. I thanked her and ended the call. Texted my lawyer. He said ex-friend testimony wasn't useful unless they were willing to testify in court, which was unlikely, but that it confirmed what we already knew about Catherine's motivations. Saturday morning, Catherine left the house early. I checked the garage and her car was gone. I went through the house more carefully, found more credit card statements, found receipts from places I didn't recognize, found text message screenshots she'd printed out and kept in a drawer, conversations with Molly about how boring I was, how she needed outlets, how she deserved better. I photographed everything. Catherine came back Saturday evening, saw me in the office, asked what I was doing. I said I was organizing paperwork for the divorce. She said I better not be going through her things again. I said everything in this house was about to be divided between us, and I had every right to document what was here. She said I was being vindictive, that I was trying to hurt her. I said I was trying to protect myself, that clearly I'd married someone who'd never actually wanted me, just my income and stability. She said that wasn't true, that she'd wanted both, that I was making her sound like some kind of gold digger when she'd contributed to our life too. I asked her to explain how spending $12,000 on herself secretly was contributing. She said she'd earned that money, that she had a job, that she could spend her income however she wanted. I pointed out that her income had been going toward the credit card bills while mine had been covering the actual mortgage and bills. That functionally, I'd been subsidizing her secret spending spree. She said marriage didn't work like keeping score, that we were supposed to be partners. I said partners don't mock each other's medical conditions. Partners don't steal medication. Partners don't marry people they don't actually love just for financial security. She walked out of the room. Sunday morning, I woke up to find Catherine sitting in the kitchen with a notebook full of calculations. She said she'd been thinking about the house, that according to her math, she'd put more into it than I was giving her credit for, that she'd been paying utilities and groceries and all kinds of household expenses that I wasn't counting. I said fine. We could let the lawyers and the court figure it out. She said that would take months, that we should try to work it out ourselves. I said I didn't trust her math, that we'd let professionals handle it. She slammed the notebook shut, said I was impossible, that I was being deliberately difficult just to punish her. I said I was being difficult? I was being difficult? She'd humiliated me in front of her family, mocked my disability, and admitted she'd married me as a financial plan, but I was being difficult? She said I needed to let that go, that we couldn't move forward if I kept throwing Thanksgiving in her face, that at some point I had to forgive. I told her there was no moving forward. There was only moving apart. That she could spin this however she wanted to her family and friends, but I knew the truth, that I'd wasted 5 years married to someone who'd never actually wanted me. She started crying again, said I was wrong, that she did want me, that she'd built a whole life with me. That had to mean something. I asked her what it meant, really, because from where I stood it meant she'd used me for 5 years and was now upset that the arrangement was ending. She couldn't answer that. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it and her face changed. She said she needed to go out, that Leah wanted to see her. She grabbed her purse and left. I sat there in the empty house and realized this was going to get worse before it got better. My phone buzzed an hour later. Catherine sent a long text saying her mother had helped her see things clearly, that I was experiencing a mental health crisis, that my medication clearly wasn't working properly, that she was going to suggest to the court that I needed a psychiatric evaluation before any divorce proceedings could continue, that I wasn't in my right mind. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I called my lawyer. Update 2. My lawyer called me Monday morning after I forwarded him Catherine's text about the psychiatric evaluation. He said it was a desperate move and would make her look bad in court, that trying to weaponize someone's medical treatment was not going to go over well with a judge. Then he asked if I'd been keeping records of her behavior over the years. I told him I'd been mentally cataloging things since I overheard that conversation 3 years ago, but hadn't written much down. He said I needed to start now. Every instance of her belittling my anxiety, every comment her family made, dates if I could remember them, contexts, witnesses. We were building a case that she'd been emotionally abusive throughout the marriage. I spent Monday evening writing it all out. The first comment about me being dramatic, about 2 months after I started medication. Catherine's mother asking if I was sure I needed those pills at a family barbecue. Gerald's joke about real men not needing chemicals. Catherine telling me during arguments that I was having an episode and couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions. There were dozens of instances. Seeing them all written out, the pattern was obvious. Tuesday morning, Catherine was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She looked like she hadn't slept. She said her lawyer had advised her to try one more time to work things out. That divorce was expensive and messy. She suggested marriage counseling. I asked her why counseling would help when she'd admitted she married me for financial security, when she'd spent 3 years telling friends I was boring, when she'd publicly humiliated me and stolen my medication. She said people say things they don't mean when they're angry, that relationships go through rough patches, that we could fix this if I was willing to try. I asked her point blank if she loved me, if she'd ever loved me. She looked at her coffee cup, said love was complicated, that it meant different things to different people, that she cared about me, that we'd built a life together and that had value. I said that wasn't an answer. Did she love me? Yes or no? She said she loved our life together, our home, the stability we had, that I was reliable and responsible. I said she loved what I provided, not me. She said that was unfair, that in a marriage what someone provides is part of who they are. I told her I wanted a divorce, that nothing she was saying changed that. She stood up and said everyone marries for practical reasons to some extent, that nobody marries purely for romance anymore, that grown adults think about finances and stability, that I was acting like a teenager who believed in fairy tales. I said maybe most people also felt actual affection for their spouse. Most people didn't mock their partner's disability. Most people didn't steal their spouse's medication as a joke. She said she'd apologized for that. I asked when exactly. She blinked. I said I didn't remember an apology. I remembered excuses, blaming alcohol, calling me dramatic. She said fine, she was sorry. There. Happy now? I said an apology under duress 2 weeks later didn't count. She grabbed her purse and left. Wednesday afternoon, my lawyer called. Catherine's lawyer had sent a formal letter requesting that I undergo a psychiatric evaluation. They were claiming my mental health condition made me unable to make sound decisions, that I was acting erratically. My lawyer said this was actually good for us, that it showed desperation, that we could easily get my psychiatrist to provide documentation that I was stable and fully capable of making decisions. He asked if I'd get a letter from my psychiatrist. I said absolutely. I called my psychiatrist's office and they fit me in for Thursday morning. I explained what was happening, that my wife had mocked my medication publicly and was now trying to use my diagnosis against me in divorce proceedings. She looked genuinely angry, said that was completely inappropriate. She wrote a detailed letter stating I'd been her patient for 4 years, that I had generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder, both well controlled with medication, that I was fully compliant with treatment and showed no signs of impaired judgment, that my decision to divorce appeared to be based on rational evaluation of an unhealthy relationship. She also added that using someone's mental health treatment as a weapon was a form of emotional abuse. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer immediately. He said it was perfect. Thursday evening, I got home and Catherine was sitting in the living room with her mother. I hadn't known Leah was coming over. Leah started immediately, said I needed to stop this nonsense, that Catherine was suffering, that I was being cruel. I asked Catherine why her mother was in our house. She said Leah had wanted to talk to me. I said I didn't want to talk to Leah, that after Thanksgiving and showing up at my workplace, I had nothing to say to her. Leah said I was being childish, that Catherine loved me, and I was throwing it away because my feelings got hurt. I asked if she remembered telling me Catherine deserved a real man and not a broken toy. She went quiet. I asked if she remembered her daughter shaking my medication bottle and mocking my panic attacks. Leah said those were jokes, that I was too sensitive. I said being sensitive to public humiliation was normal, that taking medication didn't make me broken, that her attitude toward mental health was harmful. She said mental health was just an excuse for people who couldn't handle stress, that her generation dealt with their problems. Catherine stood up and said everyone needed to calm down. I said her mother needed to leave my house. Leah said it was Catherine's house too. I said fine. Then Catherine could entertain her mother. I was going upstairs. Leah said I was being disrespectful, that she'd raised Catherine better than to marry someone like me, that she'd told Catherine from the beginning that I was weak. I stopped on the stairs, asked what she meant by that. Leah said she'd had concerns when Catherine first brought me home, that I seemed soft, that Catherine had insisted I was a good choice because I had a stable job and wouldn't cause problems, that Leah had eventually agreed because at least I could provide financially even if I wasn't ideal in other ways. I asked Catherine if this was true, if her mother had disapproved and she'd married me anyway because I was financially stable. Catherine said her mother's opinion didn't matter. Leah said she meant every word, that I was weak, that a strong man would have laughed off Thanksgiving instead of filing for divorce, that Catherine had settled when she married me. I looked at Catherine, asked if she agreed with her mother. She didn't answer. I went upstairs, heard them talking for another hour before Leah left. Catherine knocked on the guest room door around 10 p.m., said we needed to talk about what Leah had said. I opened the door. She said her mother was just upset, that she didn't mean those things. I said that was clearly a lie, that Leah had just admitted she'd thought I was weak from the beginning, that Catherine had only married me because I was a safe financial choice. Catherine said that wasn't what happened. I asked why she'd never mentioned her mother disapproved of me. She said it wasn't important. I said it clearly wasn't in the past if her mother still thought I was weak and was saying it to my face. She started crying, said that wasn't true, that she did want me. I asked if she'd want me if I lost my job, if I couldn't provide financially anymore. She didn't answer. I said that was my answer, that her lawyer could talk to my lawyer. She said the psychiatric evaluation request was her lawyer's idea, that her lawyer said most people wouldn't bother fighting it. I said her lawyer underestimated me, that I'd already gotten a letter from my psychiatrist. Her face went pale. She asked what else I'd prepared. I said she'd find out during discovery, including the credit card she'd been hiding. She said I was trying to destroy her. I said I was being thorough, that I'd spent 3 years watching and planning, that when she handed me the perfect reason to leave, I was ready. She asked what I meant by 3 years. I said I'd been planning this divorce since I overheard her tell Molly she married me for practical reasons, that I'd been organizing finances, consulting lawyers, preparing for this exact scenario. She said that was insane, that I'd been planning to divorce her for 3 years and just waiting. I said yes, that I'd been waiting for her to give me undeniable cause, that I'd been waiting for her to prove what I already knew, that she didn't love me and never had. She said I was sick, that planning a divorce for 3 years while pretending everything was fine was psychotic. I said pretending to love someone for 5 years while using them for financial security was worse. She slapped me. I stood there. She put her hand over her mouth, said she was sorry. I walked past her and called my lawyer's after-hours number, left a message that Catherine had just hit me. Catherine followed me, crying, said she didn't mean it, that I'd pushed her too far. I told her not to touch me again, that if she did, I'd call the police. She asked if I was going to use this against her. I said probably, that it was relevant to who was actually unstable. She said I'd provoked her. I said most people don't hit their spouse during an argument, that her hitting me proved she didn't respect me. Friday morning she'd already left. There was a note saying she was moving back in with her parents temporarily, that she'd be back on the weekend to get her things. I texted my lawyer. He said this was ideal, that her moving out strengthened my claim to the house. I went to work, got called into my boss's office around noon. He said he'd gotten a call from someone claiming to be Catherine's lawyer, that they'd asked about my job performance and mental stability, that he'd declined to answer. I called my lawyer immediately. He said Catherine's lawyer contacting my employer was potentially harassment. Saturday morning, Catherine showed up with her parents in a truck. They spent 3 hours loading her things. I documented everything with my phone. Catherine tried to take things I'd bought before marriage. I pointed out I had receipts. She left them. Leah said I should be ashamed of myself. I said Catherine had destroyed herself, that I'd just stopped enabling it. Sunday evening, I got a text from Catherine. Said her lawyer wanted to schedule mediation, that maybe we could work out property division without court. Then she sent another text. Said she'd thought about what I'd said, that she wanted to know why I'd stayed if I'd been planning this for 3 years, why I'd pretended everything was fine. I typed back. Said I'd stayed because I'd wanted to believe the marriage could work, that I'd hoped the affection would grow. But after 3 years of waiting, I'd realized it never would. That Thanksgiving had just confirmed what I already knew. She didn't respond. Monday, my lawyer called. Mediation was scheduled for next week. He said to prepare myself, that Catherine was likely going to fight for the house. I said I was ready, that I'd been ready for 3 years. Final update. Mediation was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. My lawyer told me to expect Catherine to fight for the house and try to portray herself as the victim. He said to stay calm, stick to the facts, and let him handle the arguments. We met at the mediator's office. Catherine was already there with her lawyer, a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd seen everything. Catherine had clearly been crying. Her eyes were red, and she wouldn't look at me. The mediator introduced herself and explained the process. We'd discuss property division, attempt to reach an agreement, and if successful, draft a settlement. If not, we'd proceed to court. Catherine's lawyer started by saying Catherine wanted to keep the house, that she'd been the one who'd maintained it, decorated it, made it a home, that I'd abandoned the property by moving to a hotel initially, showing I didn't actually care about it. My lawyer countered that I'd moved back in within a week, that I'd paid 70% of the mortgage for 5 years, that I'd put down the entire $40,000 down payment from my savings, that Catherine's contribution had been minimal. Catherine spoke up then, said the house was her home, that she'd put work into it, that she deserved to keep it. I asked her how she planned to afford it. The mortgage was $2,800 a month. She made about $50,000 a year. I made $90,000. She'd been relying on my income to cover most of our expenses. She said she'd figure it out, that she could get a roommate or refinance. My lawyer said the bank wouldn't refinance in her name alone without proof she could cover the payments, that she didn't qualify. Catherine's lawyer suggested I buy out Catherine's half, that I pay her the equity she was entitled to, and she'd sign over her portion. My lawyer asked what equity Catherine thought she was entitled to. Catherine said half. We'd been married 5 years, the house was joint property, she deserved half the equity. My lawyer pulled out a spreadsheet, showed that I'd contributed $128,000 to the house over 5 years when accounting for the down payment, my share of mortgage payments, and major repairs I'd paid for. Catherine had contributed $42,000, that the house was worth about $380,000 now, with $220,000 left on the mortgage, that the equity was $160,000. He said Catherine was entitled to her proportional contribution, not half, that based on the numbers, she'd get about $40,000 if we sold the house and split the equity fairly. Catherine's face went white. She said that wasn't enough, that she couldn't afford to buy anything with $40,000, that she needed more. My lawyer said what she needed wasn't relevant, What she was entitled to based on her actual contribution was relevant. Catherine started crying, said this wasn't fair, that I was trying to leave her with nothing. I said I was trying to give her exactly what she'd put in. That fair didn't mean equal when contributions weren't equal. Her lawyer asked if I was willing to negotiate. My lawyer said yes, that I'd be willing to give Catherine $50,000 if she signed quickly and we could avoid court. That was $10,000 more than the math supported, but it would save time and legal fees. Catherine said $50,000 wasn't enough, that she needed at least $80,000. My lawyer said that wasn't happening, that if she wanted to go to court, we'd go to court, and she'd likely get less than $50,000 after legal fees. The mediator asked Catherine what she planned to do for housing. Catherine said she'd have to rent somewhere. That $50,000 wasn't enough for a down payment on anything comparable to what we had. I said that wasn't my problem. That she should have thought about that before mocking my medical condition in front of her family. Catherine flinched. Her lawyer said we needed to stay focused on practical matters, not emotions. My lawyer agreed, said this was about numbers, not feelings. That Catherine had contributed less, she'd get less. And that was how division of assets worked. We went back and forth for another hour. Catherine kept trying to argue she deserved more because of emotional investment or because the divorce wasn't her idea. My lawyer shut it down each time, said emotional investment wasn't financially quantifiable, and that who filed first didn't matter to property division. Catherine finally agreed to the $50,000. Her lawyer drew up the terms. Catherine would sign over her interest in the house. I'd pay her $50,000 within 30 days. We'd split the remaining joint assets evenly. The divorce would be finalized within 90 days. Catherine signed the paperwork with shaking hands, asked if we could talk privately before we left. I looked at my lawyer. He said 5 minutes. We went to an empty conference room. Catherine closed the door and started crying immediately. Said she'd made a mistake, that she'd taken me for granted, that she didn't realize what she had until it was gone. I said that was the problem, that she'd never known what she had because she'd never wanted it in the first place, that she'd wanted financial security and I'd provided it, and that was the extent of our relationship. She said that wasn't true, that she'd grown to care about me, that the life we'd built together meant something. I asked her when she'd started caring. She couldn't answer. I said this was over, that we'd signed the papers, that in 90 days we'd be divorced and she could find someone else to provide the stability she needed. She grabbed my arm, said she knew she'd been wrong, that she'd treated me badly, that her family had influenced her, that if I gave her another chance she'd prove she could be better. I removed her hand from my arm, said there were no more chances, that I'd given her 5 years of chances and she'd used every one of them to prove she didn't respect me. That Thanksgiving was just the final confirmation. She asked what she was supposed to do now, where she was supposed to go. I said she'd figure it out, that she was a capable adult with a job and parents who could help her, that she'd be fine. She said she wouldn't be fine, that she'd lost everything. I said she'd lost a house she couldn't afford and a husband she'd never loved, that from where I stood she was breaking even. She slapped me again. My lawyer opened the door immediately. He'd been waiting outside. He looked at Catherine and said we were done here, that if she touched me again he'd file assault charges. Catherine backed away, said she didn't mean it, that she was just upset. My lawyer said that was the second time she'd hit me in 2 weeks and it was documented, that she needed to leave. We left. My lawyer said the divorce would proceed as planned, that I should change the locks on the house immediately, that Catherine had signed away her interest and no longer had legal right to enter. I went home and called a locksmith, had all the locks changed that evening, texted Catherine that her key would no longer work and she'd forfeited her right to enter when she signed the papers. She didn't respond. Thursday morning I got a call from Connor. He said Catherine had called him sobbing, that she'd told him about mediation, that she was devastated about losing the house. He asked how I felt about everything. I said I felt relieved, that the hard part was over, that in 90 days I'd be legally free. He said his parents were furious with me, that Leah was telling everyone I'd stolen Catherine's house and left her homeless. I said that was a lie, that Catherine had gotten exactly what she'd contributed plus $10,000 extra, that if Leah wanted to help, she could give Catherine money for an apartment deposit. Connor laughed, said his parents talked a big game but never actually helped financially. He said Catherine was planning to stay with them temporarily, that she was looking for apartments but everything in her price range was significantly smaller than what she was used to, that she was having trouble adjusting to the reality of her situation. I said good. That reality was something Catherine needed to face, that she'd been living beyond her means on my income and now she'd learn what her actual means were. Friday evening I was working in my home office when I heard pounding on the front door. Loud, aggressive pounding. I looked at my phone. It was 11 p.m. I went downstairs and looked through the peephole. Catherine was standing there, clearly drunk, pounding on the door. I could hear her crying. She was yelling my name, saying we needed to talk, that I couldn't just lock her out of her own home. I called my lawyer. He didn't answer. I called the police non-emergency line, explained that my soon-to-be ex-wife was drunk and pounding on my door after we'd agreed to property division, that she no longer had legal right to enter. They said they'd send someone. Catherine kept pounding, started kicking the door, yelling that this was her house too, that I couldn't take everything from her, that I was destroying her life. I went upstairs and recorded video from the window. Catherine was sitting on the front steps now, crying into her phone. I could hear her leaving voicemails, saying she was sorry, that she'd made mistakes but I was being cruel, that she needed me. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. I went downstairs and opened the door. Catherine stood up when she saw the officers, tried to explain that this was her house, that we were married, that she had a right to be here. One of the officers asked if she had a key. She tried her old key. It didn't work. He asked if she lived here. She said she used to, that we were getting divorced but she deserved to be able to enter her own home. The officer looked at me. I explained we'd finalized property division 3 days ago, that Catherine had signed over her interest in the house, that she was no longer an owner or resident. I showed him the paperwork on my phone. The officer told Catherine she needed to leave, that this wasn't her property anymore, that she couldn't be here. Catherine started crying harder, said this wasn't fair, that I'd ruined everything, that she had nowhere to go. The officer said she could go back to wherever she'd been staying. Catherine said her parents' house. He said she should go there now. She said she wanted to talk to me first. He said that wasn't happening. They walked her to her car, made her call someone to pick her up because she was too drunk to drive. She sat on the curb crying while we waited. Gerald showed up 30 minutes later, looked at me with pure hatred, said I'd destroyed his daughter. I didn't respond. They left. The officers said to call if she came back, that next time they'd arrest her for trespassing. I went inside and locked the door, sat in the dark living room for a while. Saturday morning, Catherine sent a long text, said she'd been drunk last night and made a fool of herself, that she was embarrassed, that she'd been thinking about Thanksgiving and how everything had spiraled from that one night, that she wished she could take it back. I didn't respond. She sent another text an hour later, said her mother had been pushing her to marry someone stable for years, that she'd felt pressured to find a husband who could provide, that she'd convinced herself she loved me because I checked all the boxes her parents wanted, that she realized now she'd been wrong, that she'd damaged something real because she'd been too focused on what her parents wanted instead of what she actually wanted. I responded, said it didn't matter anymore, that understanding why she'd done it didn't change what she'd done, that she'd used me for 5 years and humiliated me when I'd finally had enough, that no explanation would fix that. She asked if there was any chance, any possibility that someday we could try again, that she could prove she'd changed. I said no, that I'd spent 3 years watching her prove exactly who she was, that people didn't change that fundamentally, that she'd always be someone who valued stability over substance, and I'd always be someone who needed to be valued for more than my income. She said I was right, that she was sorry, that she hoped I'd find someone who deserved me. I didn't respond to that. The divorce was finalized in February. 93 days after Thanksgiving, Catherine moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a cheaper part of town, got a roommate to help with rent. I heard from Connor that she was struggling financially but managing, that her relationship with their parents had become strained because they kept asking why she'd let me go, that Leah kept saying Catherine had thrown away a good man. The irony wasn't lost on me. I kept the house, changed everything about it that reminded me of Catherine, painted the walls different colors, bought new furniture, made it mine. My medication is working fine, by the way. Panic attacks are under control. Turns out they're less frequent when you're not married to someone who mocks your medical condition. I'm not dating yet. Maybe eventually. For now, I'm just enjoying living in a home where nobody shakes my pill bottles like maracas or calls me broken, where nobody treats me like an ATM with anxiety issues, where I can just exist without performing stability for someone who never actually wanted me. Catherine's mother was right about one thing. Her daughter did deserve a real man, someone who'd call her out on her nonsense instead of tolerating it for years, someone who'd hold her accountable instead of enabling her. Turns out I was that man after all, just not the way Leah meant it.